Hi, I'm Rachel, and I was tasked with discussing the impact of settler colonialism on power dynamics and gender roles and how these dynamics were used to reinforce colonial control and domination. To start the discussion on this concept, we would need to be informed on how Indigenous people lived their lives prior to colonization. In terms of power dynamics, many Indigenous tribes and societies focused and operated on community cooperation. Everything was for the benefit of the community, and everybody respected each other and their roles. In terms of gender roles, the division of labor was influenced by age and gender, with many having what we would call traditional gender roles. Young men would be the hunters, defenders, or warriors and builders, while women in these societies were gatherers, healers, and in charge of maintaining agricultural activities. There were shared roles as well. Elders of both genders were the ones for guidance and wisdom, and both could be medicinal healers. Both genders also held leadership roles as well. An example of these power and gender dynamics are the Iroquois Confederacy, a group of five separate tribes from the East Coast in present day upstate New York and Ontario. They had a matrilineal kinship system. This meant that the tribe traced their family lineage through the mother. The women in these tribes held honored roles like the clan mother, who was a leader, and she would choose who could join their advisory council and even how food would be distributed amongst them. In other words, she held a very powerful and respected role. An example of gender dynamics would be the Navajo tribe, a tribe from the southwest in present day Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. The Navajo acknowledged the existence of four genders. Ozdan, or women, are the first because the Navajo are a matrilineal society. These are biologically born women who grow up taking on female roles. Hastin, or men, are the second. These are biologically born men who grow up taking on male roles. The third are the Nadle, who are biologically born men but grow up to function more in the roles of women. And Dilba, the fourth, who are the opposite of the Nadle, who are born biologically female but grow up taking on male roles. This concept of gender fluidity or two-spirit has different names in different tribes and societies. How settlers changed these dynamics to maintain control and domination varied by where they were colonizing. The encomienda system was used by Spanish in the Americas and Spain. The system was put into place by the Spanish for the Spanish, and it seems like they never had the well-being of the indigenous peoples in mind. To summarize, the system was put into place as a reward for the Spanish conquistadores for their service of conquering new lands. They were granted the rights to forced labor of the indigenous peoples for extraction of resources like gold, silver, and agricultural products on the lands they conquered. It is not surprising that the Spanish abused this power and worked many indigenous peoples to their death. I found it interesting that this system was reviewed and ended after members of the clergy protested and the indigenous peoples revolted. It seemed like the Spanish colonizers did not want to lose their power, so they would beat, shun, or kill messengers trying to enforce the new laws that were put into place to protect indigenous peoples. Something that caught my attention from all this was that the new laws only protected indigenous people and not Africans. And their solution was to enslave more Africans to compensate for the lack of enslaved indigenous people. The Spanish wanting to spread Christianity through the use of missionaries kept an unbalanced power dynamic as well. The Spanish would force Christianity on indigenous peoples who had no choice but to abide. This forcing of Christianity meant that indigenous people would not be able to participate in their traditional ceremonies. The Spanish also built missions where indigenous people were obligated to live. These missions had harsh living conditions and were overcrowded, leading to the spread of diseases and higher infant and child mortality and death rates. The Spanish would also impose the use of Spanish language, further erasing the indigenous traditional ceremonies. The 2 points that I just explained lead into the concepts of social death and natal alienation. This will be in regards to African enslavement, which began in Portugal before Columbus colonized the Americas. Natal alienation is defined as a severance of enslaved individuals from their cultural, social, and familial roots. It involves the intentional disruption of relationships, language, religion, and customs perpetuating a sense of loss and disconnection. Social death highlights the reduction of enslaved individuals to a subhuman status in the eyes of society. They were denied basic rights, treated as property, and dehumanizing conditions. In summary, the colonizers took everything of value and meaning in order to subdue and keep the enslaved beneath them. As I mentioned before, with the spread of Christianity, indigenous peoples lost their right to practice their own traditional ceremonies. Some of these ceremonies included the practice of defining gender roles and responsibilities within these communities. The erasure of this negatively affected women the most because they were no longer able to hold positions of power. The imposition of the Spanish language also erased the idea of gender fluidity or two-spirit, since the Spanish language was binary and only contained male and female. The spread of Eurocentric beauty and dress standards also negatively impacted the more gender-fluid population, as they had to follow a more binary European way of dressing and presenting. Enslaved African people were also impacted negatively by the effects of the colonizers' gender roles. Enslaved women were not seen as women and were often categorized as genderless. This practice of identifying them as genderless was so they could be exploited and punished the same way as men. They were further stripped of their body autonomy and often sexually exploited by the slaveholders. Enslaved men were faced with emasculation. To emasculate a man means to deprive a man of his male role or identity. The slaveholders would force enslaved men into sexual relationships with enslaved women. These were some of the ways colonial settlers and slaveholders manipulated power dynamics and gender roles in order to maintain control and domination. Thank you for taking the time to listen and watch.